I bring up here our distinguished alum, Kevin Kennedy.
President Lawrence, thanks for the gracious introduction. Tomasz, thanks for the invitation and the honor to speak before you on your 30th anniversary. It's quite a pleasure. The story that today I'm going to spend some time trying to share with you a story. And it's a story that is very important because we're at an epic time in the industry. It's an epic time because the internet is driving the public WAN infrastructure, our communications infrastructure, from what has been a period of time division multiplexing to packet switching. And that is as fundamental to communications, or this change, packet switching in the public infrastructure to communications is as fundamental as I would suggest to communications as I would suggest to you moving from to solid state technology was to electronics. So that's to my own sense of how important this is. And so the story that I'm going to share with you is a story about a small company, Cisco Systems, 3 years ago, that in its pursuit of a new opportunity, which would be how to take its core strength, packet switching, could insert itself into a public infrastructure amid a set of giants, companies such as Alcatel, Siemens, Nortel, Lucent. And with the dominant logic of the ability to use disruption of technology as the mechanism for the insertion. So the point here is, and the reason I want to stress this, is the connection between a strategy, a disruption in the market, the technology proclivities, and how someone with a core competence can use that core competence amid disruption and these technological proclivities to insert itself into a new market. So in this situation, I'm going to actually refer to Cisco as the David in the David and Goliath story. Hopefully David will win the battle. And let me start off with suggesting to you that over the last several decades, there have been a number of disruptions. In this particular slide, on the lower side, we talk about tubes to transistors, mainframes to client-server computing, and the PC to the World Wide Web. On the top, I tried to constrain it more towards telecommunication disruptions. So one was more of a deregulation, the ability to connect something other than the black phone to the phone network, the movement towards mobile, and the movement from a TDM to an IP infrastructure. And what I'm going to suggest to you are that there are a number of dominant logics that occur with every form of technology disruption. And if you understand those dominant logics, you can actually set yourself up for success. So let me go back to one that I hope we will all viscerally relate to. By the way, this is my one attempt at humor during the day, so work with me during the talk. I spent my first 17 years at Bell Laboratories in Homedale, New Jersey, and we were very proud of the black phone. And many of you might remember it. You might not remember it for innovation. One of the reasons was it usually came in one color, black. We moved to some beige over time. Another aspect to it was that it was a brilliant thing. In terms of innovation, the greatest part of innovation was perhaps moving from pulse dialing to DTMF. But on the other hand, you could take that phone and you could drop it from 6 feet and it would continue to work. We were so proud of it that, in fact, in the New Jersey area, we would even replace that phone for free if a dog had bit the cable. That's how high integrity it was. So now what I'm going to use this particular chart to suggest is that there are fundamental changes that you can count on when you have a technology disruption. Those changes are first, that the market after a disruption tends to be significantly greater than the market size before the disruption. Secondly, that when disruption occurs, it tends to occur in a suite of segments. The segments actually being a level of greater functionality, a level of greater customer intimacy, and usually a lower cost perspective. Third is that the people that are winners, or vendors that win prior to the disruption, are not usually the people that win after the disruption. And last and final, and perhaps the most challenging one for us as engineers, is that the values of the past are not the values of the future. So let's walk through this example. When I was at Bell Labs and we had the Litton litigation, which became the deregulating litigation that forced or allowed for new people to connect to the phone network, we were quite convinced that no one would ever buy the $14 phone that was perhaps made with a little bit less structural integrity, that you could drop and it would shatter when you dropped it from 6 feet. And the mean opinion score of the voice quality was around a 3.4 as opposed to a 4.0 or 4.1. The quality wasn't there. Yet people bought those phones. We were also quite convinced that nobody could possibly want to buy the effigy of a Mickey Mouse or the female Mickey Mouse version with a lamp and a phone concatenated in one entity and pay $150 for it. Did any of you have any of those phones? Well, I'll admit that I did. I didn't buy it, though. It was a gift. But the point was is that to pay $150 for this concatenation of 3 different functions when I could get this black phone for $50 that always worked was beyond my comprehension. And lastly, the top phone on the top was a small business phone. It had multiple functions on the order of 250 software programmable functions. And we were quite convinced at Bell Laboratories that no one would ever want that phone because, in fact, the brilliance of the black phone was that it was simple. It was ubiquitous dial tone, and everybody knew how to dial it. So when we began to think about did we want to form a consumer business, we were quite convinced that no one would buy the 3 phones on the right. Now, if all of us think back and we think about the retail business when we walk in, can we still today find those 3 kinds of phones today? The answer is yes. Is the market significantly bigger today than it was then? Yes. Does the phone on the bottom represent a niche or a market segmentation for lower cost? Yes. Does the market segmentation in the middle respond to a customer experience that we're willing to pay more for, or intimacy? And finally, are there business phones that many of us still pay money for but still haven't learned how to program the functions of? I can attest to that. Are the people who had all of the market share here the people who have the market share to the right? No. And lastly, if I was to take all of the 3 phones on the right and drop them from 6 feet, would they continue to work or would they most likely shatter? They'd most likely shatter, proving the point that the values of the past are not necessarily carried over to the purchase criteria of the future. Right? So those are the 4 elements of dominant logic. Let me continue with the observation to mobile. Turns out that when the mobile industry began, many of us in the phone business said, probably not going to happen. Why? Well, first, there was a very large transponder that had to go in the trunk of your car. It was large. Logistically, it was complicated to have in the trunk. Secondly, the mean opinion score, the quality of the voice was not particularly good. You would also get dropped. And it was expensive. So let's think about where we are today. Are there low-cost mobile phones that many of us have? In fact, remember, this will be the year that mobile, in terms of ubiquity, will surpass wireline voice, right? Well, there's certainly low-cost versions. There are all sorts of fancy versions that you can buy. And in terms of functionality, if you go to Japan, I was working with NTT, and they have this Docomo's iMode, where you can get the internet. They've got 3 million users in less than 6 months, so the adoption rate is just stellar. So what's my point? Well, the point is here that similar to this other disruption, where conventional wisdom would have suggested to us that this market wouldn't occur, the market did occur. The market is bigger than the market of the past. It's segmented along the same ways that we had talked about. The values of the past, quality, network reliability, are not consistent with wireline voice. And in fact, an interesting piece of this market crept up on us so quickly that even the contention that we would have in the normal wireline business, that you have to have the same operation support systems that you have on wireline, doesn't carry forward. In fact, there's a company in the U.S., it was a derivative actually out of one of the early Bell companies, Cincinnati Bell Information Systems or Convergence, that has 80% of the market share for all operations support and billing in this industry. The reason being the other folks that said this market wasn't going to happen couldn't keep up with the demand once it occurred. So just another example of how technology disruption challenged the values of the past. So this is a slide. I'm competing with a little background noise here. This is a slide that suggests we're going through another epic disruption in real time. And so the epic disruption is that for the last several decades, the public communications infrastructure has been accommodated through a time division multiplex switches. And the internet has created such a demand on those switches that packet switching is now the necessary vehicle for communications. And what we are seeing is the same kind of phenomena that we've just talked in these other two cases in telecommunications history. You've seen IP telephony as a low-cost version of toll arbitrage, right? And it became IP telephony that got us to the 5 cents per minute for long distance. We see IP telephony being used for customer intimacy, so internet-enabled voice applications. I want to order something from the Land's End catalog. I can't solve my problem simply through data access, so I want to have an IP telephony conversation to do it. Or perhaps I want to have, in Korea, a good example is about 25% of the bandwidth, internet bandwidth in Korea is related to gaming. We have developed a capability called IP telephony multicast, which allows you to multicast audible utterances to a collection of people. We developed it actually for the brokerage industry so that somebody could send out a stock quote. Turns out the Koreans said, hey, this would be a great thing to add for a consumer business where I can have an audible utterance or a sense of euphoria associated or spread to a group of people that are playing Doom or some other group game. What's my point? Just as the other two major disruptions in the telecom industry evolved to lower cost alternatives, alternatives that generated more customer intimacy, and alternatives that brought more functionality that had not been possible in a prior technology, we're seeing the same thing happen in the packet infrastructure. Will the values of the past be the same as the future? No. Will packet switching along its first instantiation perhaps have the same levels of reliability in the network? Probably not on day one. But will that preclude these elements of segmentation from emerging very, very rapidly? No, it won't. So I want to build on those themes and suggest to you that the telecommunications industry has gone through these levels of disruptions. The disruption we are experiencing right now is probably the biggest one that we have seen in probably 3 or 4 decades. It could be the century. And now I want to give you a sense of what's happening in the industry and what the impact of those technology disruptions are going to have on the industry. So one of the things that's important to understand is once you realize that these technologies will be inserted differently for different applications and be embraced by different people first, it's important to understand the segmentation of the industry. This is a particular chart, and I apologize for the abbreviations, but let me explain them. It basically says that there are a group of customers whose business it was to operate in the voice world. So the TDM circuit infrastructure, these are people like the ILEX, the RBOX, Bell Atlantic, US West, Bell South. The inter-exchange carriers such as AT&T and MCI. So again, carriers that have voice businesses that are going to add data as they support the internet in the future. On your right-hand side would be public carriers that have inserted themselves from an internet perspective. So a cable MSO, a Quest, a level 3 who said, my game is to handle internet traffic, and I'm going to add voice as an application on top of that. So two fundamentally different kinds of carriers. The folks on the right, it turns out, end up being the hunters, because they're going to introduce themselves into a data world, solve the internet, and begin to cannibalize revenues of the incumbents that are already have big businesses on the voice world. The folks on the left-hand side are people that have very, very large revenue streams today in the voice world and are going to try to figure out if they can get revenue out of data. So the hunters and the hunted. And now the applications of technology will be quite different in each of those, and that's really where I want to head. So another way of looking at this is what makes the internet go. So a couple of things that we can see is that, number one, change agents in general. Rutgers is a change agent, Cisco is a change agent. Change agents are being rewarded handsomely by Wall Street. So there's a Wall Street term called an internet quotient, Q factor. And the quotient is the market capitalization of a company divided by the replacement value of real assets. The theme here is that to succeed in the internet and to create value in the internet, there are three things that are important. Intellectual content, number one. Number two is speed, and number three is connectedness. Notice I didn't talk about brick and mortar. So intellectual content, speed, and connectedness, the notion of how do you spread the knowledge or how do you embrace the knowledge. So what this says is that if you look on the right-hand side, the incumbent vendors such as an AT&T and NTT that have huge wire facilities, their market cap divided by the replacement value of real assets is pretty humble. They don't have very good shareholder creation right now, and their physical assets, the denominator of this equation, is quite large. In the middle are some of the new people that didn't exist, like Quest not too long ago, right? And of course, on the other side of this equation are the content people. They don't have much in terms of physical facilities, but they've got a lot of content that people are trying to touch. So what observations would we make about this chart? It's an unstable situation. The people on the right are not going to be able to keep the employees. Some of them aren't going to keep their jobs. Some of them can't keep their revenue streams because, remember, their revenue streams are declining. They're not going up. Those are the voice revenue streams. People on the left have all the market capitalization. So what we're going to see is acquisitions that occur right to left or left to right in some cases. Example, Quest and Level 3, AT&T and TCI. Right? So this is an unstable situation, and the point here is the content on the left has to be married over time with the physical facilities on the right. So we know that more is going to change. And technology is going to play a major role in the winners and losers in this. So another example of the change and how epic this is on the left-hand side, we have, as a group of educators, have been evangelizing to people that data was going to eclipse voice in volume over the public network some time ago. And clearly it hit in the tandem networks first. It's now hitting in the local exchanges today. And nobody refutes that. It's only a question of when and in what geographic locations does it happen first. However, what was debated for quite some time is, well, when will the voice revenues be less significant than the data revenues? And 2 years ago, you couldn't find anybody that could have told you that. Today, I've met my first 5 customers whose data revenues are bigger than voice revenues. When I say 5, my first 5 incumbent, so my first 5 customers whose tradition has been voice revenues are now less than data. MCI is an example that is of a major incumbent that is coming close to that point. They just announced results last week where 41% of their revenues are data. Right, so they're coming close. Well, that changes your image of yourself and the way that you have to think about where you're making revenues. So let me carry that theme a little bit further. And I've been told by my friends that this is not an intuitively obvious chart. So this may be the second chart of humor that we present today. The joke may be on me, however. But let me work through it in the sense that the theme of this is consolidation and bundling. So in the upper left-hand corner, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a Goldman Sachs or a Merrill Lynch that woke up one day and realized that they had a traditional client-server intranet access organization. But likewise, they had an organization that had created internet access for their subscribers as well as employees. and said, this is no longer an efficient thing. I need to merge those two infrastructures into one. I'm going to webify, right? So I'm going to basically put all this over the internet. So they moved from this intranet and intranet access and content to simply, I have data access over the internet and content. Well, similarly, in the voice world, long-distance revenues have declined precipitously. And the numbers, go from about 22 cents a minute 18 months ago to less than 5 cents a minute, at corporate levels sometimes as low as 2 cents a minute. Right? That's all happened in 18 months. So in order to survive, long-distance carriers are trying to figure out how they can bundle local services. So you really have just a voice. And similarly, if you think about some of the acquisitions that you've read about, some moves with Bell Atlantic, there's a bundling of wireline and wireless. For anyone that has been watching some of the sports games on TV, Sprint is very public about if you get X amount of minutes for free of wireline if you buy a certain amount of wireless, Sprint PCS. Right? It's a good example. So to survive, people are merging these two. So it really leaves you with an access. So the dominant logic here is that there are those that are in the voice world trying to get the data, those in the data world trying to add voice revenues. There are people that own the physical wire, and there are people that own the content. So that moves me over to the right-hand side to make a couple of observations. Today, the revenue streams of the world, telecommunications, are in the red, on the bottom. However, the market capitalizations of the world are on the top. They're in the blue. And the game over the next 18 months will be for the people who have the market capitalization to try to suck all of the revenue dollars from the people on the bottom. And technology is going to allow that to happen. It will fully commoditize the real assets that we talked about on that last chart. And the winners are going to be those that emphasize content. So if you think you've seen a lot of structural change in terms of mergers and acquisitions and layoffs, you haven't seen anything yet. It's going to accelerate over the next 12 months. Pretty exciting. So I want to now take a next step and talk about, with a little bit more detail, how technology is going to play a role and has already played a role, and it's actually not well understood. So this is going to be 2 slides that talk about IP telephony. And I was in a research review yesterday where Dr. Flanagan had asked me what my opinion was on IP telephony. Is it happening? There's probably not a session that I go to that I don't get someone to ask me, how's IP telephony going, and it really hasn't happened yet. I actually think it's been a brilliant success. So I'm going to try to share with you why I think it's a brilliant success, and I'm going to share with you why I think this year will be an epic year for IP telephony. The 2 charts that I'm going to show are going to try to draw a relationship between time, technology proclivity, and the impact on the industry. And all of this is going to happen, and the dominant logic that I want you to remember out of this is that these relationships occur over less than a 5-year period. We're already in the 3rd or 4th year of it. So I apologize for the granularity of this chart. Some of you may choose to read it. I'm going to try to explain it and see who gets to the end first. The purpose of this is to suggest that if you think about IP telephony, prior to 1998, the technology proclivities that existed allowed for a hobbyist insertion point of the technology, so PC to PC communication primarily. The codecs tended to be not very good. They operate on the order of 30 to 60 millisecond latency, which meant the quality of the voice wasn't particularly good. The signaling tended to be proprietary, which meant that you needed symmetric PC cards on both ends. The PSTN signaling was analog. So it was a hard thing for that application to scale. It was niched, it was useful, it allowed people to harden, but it was limited. From 1998 to 1999, a new set of vendors came in the market. They tended to be big communications carriers such as Lucent, Nortel, Cisco, and many others. They embedded these DSPs into dial access systems. So they got greater densities. They embraced open protocols for signaling. And the DSPs at this point in time in codecs achieved between 10 and 30 millisecond latency characteristics, so the voice quality got quite good. It was actually quite excellent. mean opinion scores on the order of 3.9 to 4.0, as distinguished from a wireline at 4.0 to 4.1, 4.2. And so there were three markets that emerged. Toll arbitrage, so long distance. This is where you can dial a 1-800 and go out through a gateway and get a very inexpensive long distance call. IP fax gateways, as well as managed network services for an intranet. Businesses would do this for remote locations. And these three market segments, niched, remember the disruptive technologies they typically insert in niched applications, have grown brilliantly, 30 to 40% quarter-on-quarter growth for the last 18 months. Notice we weren't replacing the TDM switch network at this point. These are three very niched applications that have been growing in almost an unbridled way. So that's great. And the industry collaboration on signaling was a help. Now, 1999 and 2000. So the first observation is has that first insertion point been a success? Well, the toll arbitrage play, which allowed people to take long distance rates and drop from 22 cents a minute to 5 cents a minute and now to 2 cents a minute, has taken significant revenues from MCI and AT&T and, in fact, forced industry consolidation. So if you ask the question, has it had an impact? It has. And so there's a derivative observation from this notion of technology disruption. As an engineer, it is difficult for me to communicate to a set of other engineers how quickly a technology like this will scale. Because it takes an entire industry to continue to evolve it, experiment, trial it, and scale it. But what I can control, and I do control, is the insertion point of that technology. And once that insertion point is created, new pricing is created. And once new pricing is created, it requires a reaction from an incumbent so that they don't lose market share. So if you were to look at it from an industry perspective and ask the question, have the numbers of VoIP minutes in long distance paralleled yet long distance isochronous traffic? Probably not. Have the VoIP minutes forced a reaction that has totally restructured the pricing and the revenue streams of the long-distance market? It has, because the insertion point was what was important, not just the time to scale. It's a very important subtlety. So what I'm trying to suggest to you is that this segmentation has had a profound impact on the consolidation of the industry to date. Now let's talk about what's going to happen this year. This year is going to be exciting. It's going to be an epic year for three reasons. First is there will be features that are brought to market that cannot be accomplished with a TDM switch, such as the hoot and holler, the multicast capability of IP telephony, the gaming example or the brokerage example. Second is this will be the first year that there's a broad embrace of internet augmented IP telephony. So the Lands End catalog, right? Almost every vendor that I work with, whether it's an incumbent vendor or a new packet vendor, is trying to use the internet and voice enable it. But the third and most profound is that by the end of this calendar year, the local exchanges, the RBOX, will have sufficient voice over or IP telephony in the local exchange to challenge the pricing structures of existing wireline TDM voice. So just as when IP telephony hit the long distance market, it took about 6 months and prices reacted, those trials are happening in local exchanges today. By the fourth calendar quarter, they will be of a scale that incumbents will have to respond, and the RBOX will have to respond with pricing, taking money out of the market, forcing them to find new ways of getting revenue, probably data-oriented. So this will have an epic year on the an epic impact on the consolidation of the industry. Three fundamental changes. As that happens, of course, the scale of the systems is increasing. The ability to use MGCP for local services is increasing, so the signaling protocols have evolved. And so, again, I'm trying to draw this distinction that there are technology proclivities that allow a broadening of the penetration of a technology. As it continues to penetrate, new pricing points are inserted and industries continue to consolidate. And as I look beyond 2000 into 2001, new services such as unified communication, web-based call centers, and continued penetration of the local access is going to continue. So if you step back and you say, are things happening quickly? Yes. Are there profound impacts on the industry in terms of winners and losers of big companies? Yes. And where are we? Well, we're 1 to 2 years away of almost seeing the the close of this cycle, which has taken only 5 years. Not a decade and not 2 decades. So this is moving extremely fast. It's an exciting time. So clearly one of the industry challenges is that there's a lot of debate over winner and loser technologies. And this is just one example of call control for those of you that are working in this area of sort of the evolution of voice over the internet. One of the contemporary issues is TDM switch tends to have a line side, a network side, and a call control. And of course, the essence of it is the call control. Well, there are two fundamental models that are occurring. One is where you break the system up into a peering relationship. So protocols such as H323 or SIP are good examples of left. Another are the hierarchical decompositions such as SGCP, MGCP, et cetera. So standards that allow for a separate PC-based server, if you will, to control the line side and the network side and continue the SS7 paradigm. So my point of this is to simply argue, if you go back to the early days of Cisco, there were on the order of, Joel, 17 LAN protocols, IPX, IP, DECnet Phase 4, ChaosNet, Banyan Vines, etc. Well, the call control side of this internet explosion is going through a period where each of these niched applications have specific call control implementations that allow optimization. Will there be 5 or 10 that are associated in the near term? Yes. Will they all survive 5 years? No. But will people have to support these in order to scale the applications and allow the industry to survive? I think yes. So this is a time where you have to be agile. You can't necessarily pick one protocol implementation over the other, but you just got to move very quickly, and that was really the lesson that we had learned in the early days of routing. So where is the industry? It's easy for a vendor to get up and talk about things that could be. The reality is most of these services are being trialed segment by segment, so the technology proclivities truly are very segmentable. In many cases, we're, especially on the SS7 side, in initial deployments, so the scale of thousands and tens of thousands of users as opposed to millions, so we are nowhere near the replacement of the phone network. Calendar year of 2000, will be many millions of subscribers throughout the world. And so my only point in this chart is to suggest that when you take the changes that are happening, you've really got to apply the question of what segment is it serving and what is the state of scale. And we're still very, very early in the scale of these. So another counterintuitive aspect to the internet and the change that is occurring in this decoupling of the infrastructure is network design. So I want to come back to the notion that we've hit the point where people believe that IP services are the way to deliver converged video, voice, and data over the internet. And of course, what happened here over the TDM infrastructure, this was really the first point of convergence. So we don't like to think that. But people had voice and data on a TDM infrastructure for some time. Now the problem is that in 3 years there were 70 million new internet users. Those internet users stayed on the net. What began to be about 37 minutes per session. It's now grown to over 55 minutes per session. So if you think about 70 million users in 3 years and 55 minutes per session, what you convince yourself of is there's 1 billion usage units minutes of change in a very small period of time. And that basically choked the TDM infrastructure, right? The TDM infrastructure was designed for about 3.2 minute residence time. So convergence occurred here. This infrastructure has choked, and now people are moving to packets. Now the question is, and there's a big debate in the world, is it an ATM, connection-oriented architecture, or is it an IP, straight layer 3? Well, it turns out it's going to be both. And the reason is that several reasons. One is, if you were an enterprise customer that has voice applications and you want to move to data, you're probably going to start with an IP plus ATM infrastructure today. That's how a service provider will propose. If you're one of those customers that is really an IP customer and willing to add IP telephony on top of it, or if you're a public carrier that is relentlessly pursuing the internet and the consumer and wants to add voice on top of that, then you would start with here. And by the way, most carriers are consolidating, right? The people that had the voice revenues are losing voice revenues, so they're trying to buy these guys and vice versa. So 1 year from now, almost every customer that I have that offers a public carrier infrastructure is going to have both of these networks. A network that has been optimized for voice for enterprise customers, a network that has been optimized for the relentless growth of the internet, and convergence, actually, in the near term, is going to be about software convergence. It's going to be about IP being the service delivery vehicle, MPLS perhaps as a control mechanism for it, but convergence occurs in software, not in physical plant or physical infrastructure. And in fact, people are going to need multiple networks because they're going to serve different purposes. One that was started more from a voice perspective and the other which was more of an internet perspective. So a lot of change in the way that people are thinking about the technologies that occur, and a change to the conventional wisdom of the industry. Another great aspect to this is the mobile world has basically endorsed the notion of IP being the gossamer thread for reconciling the dissimilar access networks, whether it be CDMA, GSM, etc. And that's the good news. The bad news is that the mobile industry is moving so quickly that keeping it standardized is going to be a challenge. So I think the good news is that they have the right architectural precepts. The question is can we as implementers move quick enough to solve their problems? And then lastly, businesses are going through a major disruption as well. On the left-hand side, you can see sort of three colors. One is that there's a TDM infrastructure on the customer's premise, which was the PBX. Right? Think of the PBX as the equivalent of a Class 5 switch in a public infrastructure. You have your client-server applications and your mainframe. And of course, the customer input for an existing enterprise customer, Goldman Sachs, comes into an ACD or a call center. A voice response unit may help interrogate the customer. You may go to a voice response to a TN3270 DIP process on a mainframe to get a subscriber record. But what I'm really trying to suggest is that the input to that customer is primarily a TDM process. So where are we headed? Today, customers are realizing that they have to become internet enabled. So they are very interested in having web-based customer applications or interfaces. And once they do that, they realize that they need a storage area network and they need an IP-based phone network sitting behind. And in fact, the conventional technologies that we have grown up with, whether it was the mainframe, client-server computing, or TDM-based telecom, are all going to be diminishing in import over time. And it really becomes the enterprise that is your content switched that is the changing paradigm. So what people lack is the technology proficiencies and the ability to hire people that know how to do that. So they're looking to outsource it. They're looking to get graduates that know how to do it. This is the crisis of the industry. People now know where they want to go, but they don't know how to get the human beings to get there. That's really a problem for all of us to solve. So of course, this plays into Cisco's favor, or anyone that has a focus on packet switching, because that is, in fact, where the internet is going to revolutionize the enterprise, and it's already starting right now. So this is a simple suggestion that the dynamic that is occurring in the industry today is that at an enterprise, just as we saw in the case of public carriers, there are those that are focused on data, trying to add voice, and they're going to look for an IP network. That was the network on the bottom of that two-cloud chart. Those that are operating with voice, trying to consolidate, put data on top, they'll be looking for an IP plus ATM network. So similarly, what I'm trying to suggest here is that technology ideology is misplaced yet again. At the enterprise, we're going to need multiple networks and multiple technologies, and it will be a software convergence layer of IP and MPLS that are going to bring these technologies together. So now, That's sort of the dynamic of the industry. And now what I wanted to suggest to you is a way of thinking about how disruptive is. In my mind, and this is a personal opinion, I believe that there are 6 canonical elements of disruption that are occurring that we will never recover from. The first is the tyranny of the DS0, and this is the recognition that our phone network has been about the 64K bearer channel and the physical multiplexing and demultiplexing and switching of that physical bearer channel, whereas tomorrow, or what we're implementing today, is packet switch connection-less technologies. I'm going to describe that for you in a little bit more detail. But fundamentally, as the phone company, what we spent decades doing was optimizing constrained bandwidth. That's what TDM was about. How do you optimize constrained bandwidth? What the new world is about is how do you deal with unconstrained bandwidth in a reactive manner? That's what packet switching is about. So it's a fundamental paradigm shift in the way we think about the world. Second was the phone industry was about the ubiquity of a single service. It was called dial tone. The internet is about the ubiquity of multiple services on the fly. The third, and this is perhaps one of the most revolutionary pieces, in the phone network, the relationship between you as the subscriber and the application was defined by the phone network. We had a euphemism, we called it AIN, the Advanced Intelligent Network. In reality, it was probably underwhelming in intellect, but that was what we called it. Well, how about in the internet world? The relationship of the subscriber to the network will be defined by the application. It's a fundamental change. Next, plan bandwidth. We used to plan bandwidth allocation and delivery 12, 18, 24 months. You can't plan for the internet. Every forecast I've submitted to my company is wrong. I'm always underestimating. That's how quickly it's accelerating today. So you have to be reactive. Static service delivery. Nope, in the future it's got to be dynamic. In order to have a competitive edge, you've got to be able to be there with the new service and implement it within hours, not months. And lastly, we have tried to decompose the industry. The industry was about a bunch of titans. They were called Nortel, Lucent, Alcatel. They were vertically integrated. They would do everything for you. It might take a long time to do it, but they would do everything for you. The future is more kinetic. Right? It's lots of people participating, getting energized, having customer intimacy, and becoming contributors in innovation. It's much more like the PC or client-server model. Right? Lots of people innovating is the way of the future. So these are our 6 fundamental tenets of disruption. Any one of them, frankly, is significant. All 6 of them are occurring, and they will, we will never recover from them, is my point. So let's talk about the physical instantiation of that. This was a picture of sort of the tyranny of the DS0. So this is the 64K bearer channel coming through your, from your phone through multiplexers. The reality is the switching industry, I made the statement that this was about constrained bandwidth. You had to still decompose those multiplexed interfaces down to that DS0 to switch at a class 5 or a class 4 switch. You'd have to do the same thing at the class 4 and the same thing on the other side. What's the point? It's a fairly complex picture, lots of boxes which cost a lot of money, and it was about managing the constraints of the 64K bearer channel. Boy, isn't life a whole lot simpler if this was statistically multiplexed? Now, it turns out that this is a deceiving chart. If you were with Cisco, you'd use the same chart probably, but you know, what's the deception here is that it turns out that we believe that statistical multiplexing will reduce the cost of the equipment by an order of magnitude of the switching equipment. So that's great. Turns out that that's probably only about 30% of the operations cost of a network. So the scaling and the operations support pieces are still a very, very large piece of it, and will have to be, there are other antidotes to that, but still a very significant piece to reduce it in order of magnitude. Bandwidth allocation we talked about. What's this fury about fiber optics? Well, there's a couple things. One is that the cost of optics are driving a tremendous windfall in terms of bandwidth ability. So an example is you can get on the order of 100 fold more megabit or capacity today for about 20% more the cost of what you paid 2 years ago. Right? That's how dramatic it's changed. The second thing, though, that the new fiber optic architectures, I won't go through this in detail, bring another asset, is that the software intensity in the boxes today allows you to reallocate bandwidth pretty much on the fly, in order of minutes to an hour, as opposed to going through a digital cross-connect that might take days, weeks, or months. That even sets up new markets such as futures markets, where people want to invest in the allocation of bandwidth. So it's both time, it's certainly speed, and it's also cost that's improving here. People are trying to drive broadband to the home, whether it be DSL or cable. It's not a particularly brilliant argument to try to pick one over the other. The proclivities of particular industries are going to probably, and geographic locales are going to be more dominant in terms of what technology is right. We'll actually see wireless be a complementary factor to both cable and DSL. The important thing is for the industry to mobilize and learn how to make money. So probably the greatest inflection point that's occurred in the last 90 days is people have figured out they can't make money on broadband by just selling internet data access. So now they're trying to bundle multiple services, and this is a great thing for the industry. So that's an inflection point, and that's good. I made the statement that a disruptive factor is going to be this notion of the relationship between the subscriber and the network will be defined by an application. This is an example of a small company that is using XML-based interfaces. So the notion of either smart clients or else a proxy browser that looks into your web POP. So you have your applications, your server, the directory that defines the passive relationship between you, the subscriber, and the network, and a registry that defines the active relationship between you and the network. They're rolling this out for companies like AOL as a VPN provisioning story, right? So this is happening. These kinds of architectures are being deployed this summer. That's how. So again, I can't stand in front of you and make a statement, when will the industry have scaled this technology ubiquitously? But what I can confidently stand in front of you and tell you when the insertion points of these technologies will hit the industry. This is a view of the world that is relevant this summer. There is nothing that precludes this from being extended to VXML and, in fact, providing local services. And once that is done, local services could be provided by an AOL or another intermediary, not necessarily by an RBOC. Interesting change that can occur over the next year. So this looks like a marketing pitch. Here's an important aspect. So we've talked about changes that are occurring in the core of the optical network, the pricing that changes, the fact that you can react to bandwidth changes because you can now reallocate bandwidth in terms of minutes rather than days. The next major area is going to be content. And this is an important area because this is where, as we talked about, the internet value is created. It turns out there are going to be many models. Some are going to be VPN hosting. As an example, a company by the name of Smart Pipes is doing that. Outsourcing, we talked about the enterprise businesses. Once you webify, there's a lot of that piece up in that circle that could be outsourced to a service provider. If a small business doesn't want client-server administrators, they certainly would want that. A big business might want SAP to be outsourced. Hosting applications for operations provisioning for small ISPs, content distribution, so companies like Akamai, and telephony services, unified communication, local services, all can be done by not just a native service provider, but actually outsourced service provider. So those that develop competencies in these hosting apps are going to be very, very key. The badness is no one knows how to make money from this yet. The good news is that venture capital is spawning numerous of these companies, and what will happen will be to see what kind of mergers and acquisitions occur around that. Once the content providers such as AOL and Yahoo begin to embrace them, I think the direction of the industry is going to be set. So a lot of change relative to this picture. And And of course, some of the work that you've got going on here between the last two, so some of the VXML work for basically taking XML-based HTTP pages and being able to interrogate them through VXML proxies, very, very important. So this is going to be an epic year on the IP telephony front for hosted applications. On the operations support side, most companies are embracing an open architecture. Here's another key inflection point. As voice revenues have dropped, the logic of carrying my old subscribers to the future has now been challenged. And once a customer has their data revenues eclipse voice revenues, their challenge is they can't add data revenues quick enough. They want to be able to move them on about a 3-month time cycle. In the voice world, people add new services, tend to be 9, 12, 15 months because of operations support complexity. So customers that would have normally said, take my old customers and migrate them to the future, they said, Mr. Kennedy, that's not the way we want to do it. We really want to move as though we were a greenfield. So just treat my data infrastructure as separate and get us up to new services as quickly as possible. Another inflection point in the market. So that's good for all of the ecosystem partners or people that work as systems integrators, application delivery, or appliance vendors. So my real point here is as voice revenues fall, the notion of more and more people to say, treat myself as a greenfield, this is playing to the benefit of this open infrastructure. So where are we? This is probably the only Cisco-specific chart that I have. From a strategy perspective, so the story that I've tried to tell you is a story of a David who sees an insertion into a market through technology disruption, tries to insert with those disruptive elements, and where are we on that journey? And what I'm trying to suggest here is we have spent about 2 years, 3 years building blocks, deploying trials, and right now we have moved from a push to a pull. The industry actually wants to consume this technology more quickly than the vendor community is actually able to deploy it today. So that's a good news. So if in some sense we haven't seen anything yet in terms of volumes, that's great. In terms of just watching our own growth, you can see that this strategy has ended up being positive. These are quarterly revenues. The only observation I would want you to make is that things are accelerating. So just as this curve up here suggests we've started and we've moved from push to pull, you can also see that just from the numbers, things are continuing to accelerate for the industry. And this is true of most vendors, so I'm not trying to suggest that there's a difference for Cisco. So where we're headed is over the next 6 months, I expect more and more customers to have both of these layer 3 as well as IP plus ATM networks. Virtual private networks will become more the norm and are being rolled out very, very quickly. And now that new hosting applications are coming, more people are trying to figure out how to add new services for revenue. Right? So that's great. The innovation cycle is about to happen in the public network. For Cisco, we have our own challenges. We are a company that has grown largely through acquisition. Some of you that might possibly follow Cisco as a stock know that we have a reputation for doing a lot of acquisitions. That's a challenge because you end up buying a bunch of teams that are brilliant in their silos. But of course, what is happening in the industry, we're really deploying distributed communication systems. And that notion of systems mentality is not something that perhaps a startup has had. So for myself, part of the challenge that I'm trying to bring, and a great thing about coming to the university and seeing some of the systems work that you're doing, is how do I begin to evolve Cisco in much more systems thinking. So we have started thinking about the solutions and how we pull these things together. We're still nascent in that, I'd say sophistication, but we recognize where we have to go and continue to work very hard towards it. From a network architecture evolution, one of the biggest challenges that you have on somebody who has been in the market in the voice world is say, I like this layer 3 stuff. I understand that I have to go there, but I'm not sure I want to go there until the reliability of a packet network is as good as the reliability of a phone network. Have any of you heard that? Probably read about it, right? When the MCI outage that occurred for 11 days a year ago, or actually in the fall, happened, the good news, it was another vendor's equipment. The bad news was I spent the next 3 months, every time I met a customer, answering their questions as to why they should invest now in packetized infrastructure. So that wasn't good for the industry. So here's a point of view. Today, we think about the time division multiplex network, the voice network, operating at 5 nines. So that means on the order of 10 defects per million. Means that it's out for about 5 minutes a year of unplanned outage. Wireless networks, mobile networks, by the way, they operate at around 3 nines and a 5. 3 nines and a 5. So we're talking many tens of minutes of outage each year. I go home, actually, I live 14 miles from work, and I get dropped 4 times between work and home. It's quite an annoying thing. I don't know if you guys like voicemails. I get 70 voicemails a day. Very seldom are there people saying kind things to me. I get dropped 4 times each time I try, and of course the mean opinion score of the voice is quite putrid. I think that's a technical term. So there's nothing positive about that experience, other than perhaps the mobility of it when it works. But again, mobile will be eclipsing wireline voice this year. So what I wanted to frame for you is where are these packet technologies? In the case of TDM technology, the largest IP plus ATM implementations in the world exist. AT&T has one of them. We're the provider of the service. And today, we've run about 6 out of the last 8 months at better than 10 defects per million, so better than 5 nines. So the industry at large is capable of deploying a very large IP plus ATM network with roughly TDM operational reliability. The mobile network really establishes the low point for communications. I don't mean that in a negative way. That's just sort of empirical observation. And IP networks operate someplace in between. They're actually in the probably 4 nines realm. And the good news is that the technologies for these 2 packet switch technologies will deliver roughly equivalent network availability statistics within the year. So the technologies exist to do that. So what's the message? Is if there was no plan for continuing to improve, should one be thought-provoking about what level of embrace they give to packet networks? Yes. But given that today these networks are significantly better than mobile, and that we're only a year away from improving to what is the best in class, I expect very, very relentless build-outs. And it's because of that, this is just an example of how are people responding who buy the most packet infrastructure. So this is a poll of both business and service providers. We actually bonus our employees on making sure that customer satisfaction continues to increase each year. And what you can see is that despite the fact that people's expectations are climbing dramatically because the applications that they're putting on the network is climbing, and mission criticality of it, we're still running very, very well in terms of customer satisfaction. So, finally, where we have ended up in this David and Goliath story is that we've been fortunate that most of all of the packet switch technologies, we have a very, very significant market share relative to the titans of the past. The bad news is it's still very early in the game. Right? We're only in the very earliest innings of a 9-inning game. So we have a lot of hard work ahead of us. So what should you expect from Cisco and what should you expect from the industry? You should expect all of the players to continue significant investments in the optical infrastructure. Right? Lots of cost reductions in terms of megabits per second are happening. And because there's this new disruption of being able to reallocate bandwidth in terms of minutes, this is a fundamental disruption that people will continue to build out. More and more customers, as well as folks like ourselves, as well as enterprises, are going to focus on content and hosting. Remember, that's where those that own the content are going to be sucking the dollars out of the people that own the brick and mortar. So having a strategy around content is crucial. Having your strategy around content is going to be crucial as a university. Right? So super important area. Third is in order for these things to scale, now that things have moved from a push to a pull, It's going to move from platforms and software transport and call control to how do I scale from a network management and provisioning perspective. So lots of activities going to exist there. Call control, as we talked about in that the advance of IP telephony, tends to be segmented by specific applications, whether it's long-distance toll arbitrage, managed network services, local services. So we're going to see lots of call control mechanisms. The only safe statement that you can make is that call control is going to continue to commoditize in price. Right? So that will continue to happen, and there'll be lots of implementations or variants. Wireless technologies, Cisco's insertion into it, as well as the advance and embrace of IP, will continue. We will try to drive the industry in terms of leading the charge in terms of network availability. If the folks that make packetized infrastructure do not self-discipline and continue to lead ever-improving reliability statistics, will slow the industry down. So it is crucial for us to advance the availability. And then lastly, the infrastructure that exists outside is continuing to train themselves and create levels of innovation so that this notion of a vertical industry can take place. Again, early in the game, I think it's happening. We have probably 20 to 30,000 people trained today that didn't exist a year ago. But it's still early in the game. So we'll see. So let me see if I can summarize and leave you with a couple of thoughts. Hopefully I've shared with you a story that suggests that, number one, we are going through an epic time in the internet. It is the reinvention of the communications infrastructure of the world. So it's, things don't get better than when you're changing the world. The second aspect to it is that there's an opportunity anytime that you go through a disruption for people that didn't participate in the past to use technology disruption to participate in the future. And that's been the essence of this David and Goliath play. In this particular case, Cisco trying to recognize its humility as being the David, but hopefully trying to employ the strategy of technology disruption to become a relevant player in the future. The third is that we have moved from a push-to-pull environment. So this notion of Jeffrey Moore that there's a crossing of the chasm in these tornado markets, well, guess what? Whether you think about what you read in the paper, whether you look at the numbers that I showed you that are Cisco's sales numbers, you name the dimension that you want to pick, we're crossing the chasm. Right? The communications infrastructure embrace of packet technology, of optics, of those technologies that will drive the future, it is occurring today. And the only challenge is not can we insert, we have inserted. The question will be how quickly can we scale things up. So in summary, I'm going to suggest to you that it's happening. It doesn't get any better than this. The biggest challenge we have is for smart folks that want to participate in any way, shape, or form. There's research issues, there's scalability issues, and there's just people to build and operate these networks every day. And mutually, we all have a role to play in making sure that that comes to fruition. So I'd like to thank you for your time. I hope this story of the notion of disruptive technologies was useful to you, and thank you for the invitation today.
Do you have any questions? We have a few minutes for questions. Okay. I have a question, actually. On your chart, you had third generation wireless, second generation wireless, and somewhat charted in 2002, or maybe even earlier. What, in your view, is a chance for a 2 megabit per second ubiquitous connectivity or wireless any time in next 5 to 10 years?
So my optimism is high. Let me break your question into 2 or 3 pieces. The big innovation that's occurring in mobile is, number one, the deconstruction of what has been proprietary boundaries. So proprietary RF interfaces, proprietary call control structures. And so wireless is moving in this decoupling of bearer channel control from transport, which just like the wireline industry is. So that's good. And people tend to take that belief system and associate it with Generation 3. It is also true that there are what they call generation 2.5, things like GPRS, that are more focused on internet data access, WAP being one of the control structures for that are occurring even faster than getting to 3G. Thirdly, there are technologies such as HDR, which take elements of the mobile frequency structure and are now being used and deployed by customers such as US West as higher megabit local loop access. So I think your observation and thesis being is the probability high that those that make the ubiquitous cell phones will be able to quickly ramp from 19.2 to 64K, 128, potentially 2 megabits. I don't know how quick they'll get to 2 megabits, but do I think they're going to succeed in getting to at least a half and 1 over the next 2 years? I actually am pretty optimistic, and I think it's probably not more than 2 years away. I think we could be surprised. It could be 12 months in terms of insertion points. Scale is always a different question, but in terms of insertion, I think it could be as close as 12 months. Is that?
Another question is, if there's no others, I have a couple actually, but go ahead.
Actually, just to follow up on Tamash's, how would the impact of technologies like Bluetooth?
Yeah. I think there's good mobilization around Bluetooth. I think the challenge that the mobile industry has is you have those people that make handsets. You have those that are vertically oriented in terms of infrastructure. So there's sort of the Nokias of the world, right? The handset guys. There's sort of the Motorola, or there's the Nortel and the Lucents that don't really do well with handsets, but make a lot of the infrastructure, call control, operations support. And then there's people that make packet infrastructures, and like a Cisco, say. And all of them are coming at this notion of the decoupling of call control from bare channel transport, and from a different structure, different viewpoint, and optimizing on, do I get data, high bit rate data, or do I focus on voice revenues first? And so which protocols are winning out in the standards bodies is a challenge. I actually think the winners and losers are going to be defined on a franchise, so which customers have enough guts to go to market with a particular implementation first. So I think it's going to be driven by customers, not necessarily. So to that extent, I think Bluetooth has some good momentum in terms of customer embrace and will be a reality. Hard to predict the timing, but yeah, a lot of mobilization.
You talked a lot about disruption in the industry. And the other day, AT&T announced the earnings and really disrupted.
Yes.
I believe that's the first point that we see in the thesis.
Great question. The point here was AT&T just announced some underwhelming earnings, and I think that's right. And layoffs and such. And is that the first point? I actually think there have been multiple points, but if your question is this an example of what I was talking about? Absolutely. The phenomena there is that they have lost probably about 20% of their long-distance revenues in about a year. But in addition, they have found cannibalized their business voice revenues by virtue of competition and insertion points from CLEX, for example, people going with SDSL as business revenues, which they weren't counting on. So the combination of not only the long distance, which has declined rapidly and precipitously, but they were expecting in some ways, but then add on some business voice revenue declines, has been a challenge. And now the question is, how quickly can you react to it and get new revenue streams up? And then lastly, the fact that they haven't been able to capitalize on the TCI acquisition. You've got to think about what I just said. AT&T has added to its bricks and mortar, experienced the decline in their traditional revenues, and where's the growth of other content revenues? They haven't found that formula yet. So they are in a challenging spot, for sure. And as a former employee, I am concerned about that.
What's your take on the ABC Time Warner feud?
Don't know that I have a take, and I don't mean that from a politically correct statement. I think the there are going to be lots of hemorrhages and legal challenges as content and facilities merge and dispute who owns what. So I'm not educated enough on the specifics of that one, but the notion that we're going to see more of those kinds of fights, true. We'll see a lot more. Yes, sir.
How important, you said that values of the past are not for the future, how important is the issues of hidden security breaches for networks of the size and magnitude that you're talking about? Will this be a persistent value of the future to prevent these types of analogs, the viruses, on computers?
Yeah. So question was, given that we talked about the values of the past are not indicative of the purchase criteria of the future, what is the thought on security as having an important value for the longevity of networks? I think it is going to be very crucial, and I don't think we as an industry have, we're in the earliest innings of beginning to step up. It's got research aspects to it. It has regulatory aspects to it. And of course, vendors actually have to play more. You know, the internet-oriented genesis of much of the packet switch network had less concern with it. So as we go into the public infrastructure, we have to spend a lot more time than we have. So it's excellent question.
What's your take on IP multicast?
I mean, it's great. So we actually are in trial with IP, well, there's IP multicast, which has been in networks for some time, and then there's IP telephony-based multicast, which is one of these epic functions that has not existed in the phone network and is unique. So I think it's going to play a major role in the deconstruction or the acceleration of people away from TDM infrastructures. It'll be one of those features that these aggressors go into particular markets, offer some features, and forces the pricing competition to move. So it's an inflection point, I guess. Joel, our general releases end up going out this summer for IP telephony multicast. So there's enough of an insertion occurring in the second half of this year that I think the market will accelerate around it. It's a great question.
The RBOX and the ILEX have a massive circuit switched network across the country. As they move to revamping their network, what is Cisco's strategy / products to help them revamp this massive circuit switch network?
Yeah, so all of the vendors, first strategy the question was if you take the incumbent providers, they have this huge, massive circuit switch network. What is Cisco's strategy to do it? So the first strategy is you offload the network, right? You don't try to replace it. So the one strategy that is a death knell to people, but is a seduction for an incumbent, is to introduce using packets to cost reduce a TDM switching infrastructure. Well, guess what? People have spent decades using TDM infrastructures to cost optimize constrained bandwidth. So thinking that you could use a packet switch infrastructure to be cheaper, best thing to do is to walk into, for them to walk into Cisco, ask them for a price of a packet switch alternative, and then tell Lucent, Cisco's going to give us aggressive price, why don't you just drop your prices, right? It is a risky thing to use packet switch to achieve cost reductions. Now, that being said, can you offload the switching infrastructures so that you can regain ports for voice as opposed to choking it with data? That's a good strategy. And then the second one is to relentlessly go after new applications. When you do that, you want to have an IP plus ATM infrastructure for new voice consolidation and an IP infrastructure for internet applications. And most ILECs today are also embracing that two-cloud structure. In reality, by the way, most networks end up having multiples of those two clouds, and often from different vendors. So the intellectual belief that we can converge operation support systems, it's a nice belief system, but it seldom happens in real life.
One more question.
Kevin, one of the deterrents to accepting new technologies has been establishing the operational and administration aspect, security being one of the things like this. Do you think that there have been any fundamental changes that would allow these new technologies to be adapted more easily? And do you think those blocks will still exist?
So the question was, operations support tends to be one of the most significant inertial components to overcome to embrace new technology. I think there are at least two, possibly three aspects to that. Let me answer it in this way. First aspect is the emotional aspect of the operations support is where the cost and the spending occurs. That's where the control of an operator exists. And so the emotional reaction will be, I have to take a new technology and put it through my existing cost structure. Now that data is eclipsing voice in revenues, that emotional connection is being broken. So the first inflection point that is just occurring now is that dominant logic is being challenged at incumbent after incumbent, especially the inter-exchange carriers. The second question related to that is are there any new technologies that are going to enable the acceleration of provisioning of new services, such as data services? And certainly directory-enabled networks for the quick provisioning of VPNs, for example. We have probably 3 or 4 installations of VPNs where, using directory-enabled networks, we can provision thousands of users inside of 30 to 60 minutes, where it may have taken us days with a provider before that. So I think the answer to your question is, emotionally, there has to be this inflection point in the market where data revenues eclipse voice, and once that happens, the blockage gets removed. Secondly, are there new technologies? Directory-enabled networks are just one example of that. These provisioning systems where you saw the application becoming the broker of the subscriber to the network, and so companies like Smart Pipes are out there creating new provisioning stories. Those are going to be crucial. The bad news is, which is the third piece of your, potentially to your question, is that although those technologies offer great promise and they are being inserted surgically right now, they are not ubiquitous answers. So it's, yes, you can do it more aggressively perhaps with a VPN, but if you wanted to have a managed LAN service, it might be, we don't have the operations support. So it's going to take another year, I think, for enough of those surgical insertions to have scaled OSS systems. Right? We're still inserting. Does that answer the question?
I know that Kevin and the President have to go to another meeting.
Thanks.
I'd like to thank you.
Thank you, Cameron.